I know that feeling. The deep, heavy quietude that settles over the Western world when the last brittle remnants of forced cheer have been swept away. The hyper, color intensity of the holidays fades, replaced by a muted gray uncertainty. As the week when you forget what day it is, when the email stops flowing, when every phone call feels like an interruption. The calendar becomes a smudge, the hours stretch and blur, and the only certainty is the overflowing trash bin. The detritus of mandatory joy. We call it Twixtmas, the buffer zone, the space to breathe. But that term is modern, saccharine, designed to domesticate a feeling that is fundamentally untamed. What we are truly experiencing is something far older, far stranger, and profoundly destabilizing. I've spent years tracking the echoes of calendar shifts, the moments when entire cultures recognized that time itself was not a flowing river, but a brittle, manipulated structure. This specific pause isn't accidental. It feels like a collective societal exhale, but underneath that manufactured relaxation, there is a deep architectural tension. We are waiting for the year to shift, standing on a precipice. We are suspended in a gap, a temporal no-man-cess land where the rules, both mundane and metaphysical, are quietly, briefly revoked. This quietude is not merely rest, it is observation. We are observing the absence of structure. Look at the faces around you during this week. They are present, but unfocused, guarded. They have the look of people who sense the arbitrary nature of the clock. My work as an archivist demands I look beyond the superficial gloss into the deep, hard wood of tradition. And when you look there, you find something genuinely chilling. The fact that for centuries, our ancestors didn't teach us to feel this temporal dissonance. They named it, they feared it, and they built elaborate, necessary rituals around it. They knew this week was an open door. Think about the seismic moments of Western history, the chaotic shifts from Julian to Gregorian calendars, massive cultural upheavals that demanded entire days, sometimes weeks, be erased from existence. But even before those sweeping reforms, cultures recognized a natural, dangerous fissure in the turning wheel. In the ancient Anglo-Saxon world, they didn't just worry about the cold and the endless darkness of midwinter. They worried about the imbalance of this specific week. They saw these days as unmoored, lacking the protective structure of the gods or the defined framework of labor. They understood that the calendar, when followed correctly, was a binding spell. And this week, the spell was lifted. This week, the one where you wander around in old sweatpants and eat cold leftovers, was traditionally understood not as a time for recovery, but as a time of supreme vulnerability. It was when the veil was thinnest, when the things that should remain sealed in the darkness were permitted, temporarily, to walk among the remnants of your domestic cheer. The surviving folklore is stark. If you listen closely, you could hear the wild hunt passing low over the roofline. If you looked carefully, the hungry spirits were already inside your home, rearranging the chaos you just created in the name of celebration. This period was so acutely feared that they developed systems to avoid defining it, to intentionally leave it outside the jurisdiction of the structured year. They needed these days to be uncounted, nameless, disposable, a necessary silence designed to contain something far more dangerous than simple exhaustion. I have retrieved the necessary files. I know the proper term that defined these 7 days, the term that terrified those who had to live through them. It is Twixtmas. Dagar, the week of the forgotten, uncounted days. This specific gap was not a mistake in the calendar. It was a deliberate, societal decision. The question that remains, and the file we must now open, is this. If the entire structure of the modern Western world, global trade, communication, government, still collectively honors this ancient, nameless pause, what exactly is the structure protecting us from today? If you've lived long enough in the modern West, you know this week, whether you give it a name or not. It is the spectral space between the excess of Christmas morning and the iron-clad resolve of January 1st. We call it Twixtmas now, a catchy marketing term that attempts to neutralize the strangeness. Officially, it's a national slow down, a governmental sigh, a 7-day window designed for resting consumer culture and facilitating the logistics of return labels and clearance sales. But rest, historically, is seldom the goal of a calendrical void. When the routine stops, when the machinery of the everyday grinds suddenly to a halt, as it does across Britain and the states in this specific sliver of late December, we are not simply catching our breath, we are being held still, waiting. And the waiting, in this unique stretch of time, has always been infused with a deep ancestral nervousness. Look back at the structures that preceded our own. The concept of the intercalary days, the days added or subtracted to keep human time aligned with cosmic time, was never a source of celebration. These were days outside the law, outside the divine protection, literally, died. The Roman calendar, the various European solar and lunar adjustments. Every one of them had a gap, a space where the world stopped making sense, where structure broke down. This week is the direct descendant of that fear. It is the time when the guardrails of the year are momentarily lifted. The official story says these days are for family, for reflection, for winding down. But reflection, when forced, often turns into dredging. We are left alone in the wreckage of the year, surrounded by the physical evidence of consumption and the intangible ghosts of the previous 11 months. The speed and relentless demands of modern life serve as powerful sedation. This week is the withdrawal period. The anxiety we feel, the inability to settle, the persistent sense that time itself has softened and stretched, is not a personal failing. It is a cultural memory of vulnerability. This feeling, this soft dread, was weaponized by older traditions. Often expanded to the 12 days of Yule, was the hunting ground of the restless dead and the monstrous. The wild hunt roared loudest during this interval. The doors were bolted not for warmth, but for defense. Why? Because when the calendar falters, human boundaries are believed to falter, too. The rules that govern our reality, the rules of work, debt, punctuality, and order, are revealed to be human constructs, thin scaffolding holding up the sky. And when that scaffolding is exposed, we get nervous. We don't rest well. We look in the mirror and see not the person who is taking a well-deserved break, but the person who has been failing to measure up since the last resolution evaporated sometime around February. This enforced holiday is less a gift and more a holding cell, where we must confront the imbalance sheet of our own actions. The calmness we project often masks a deep, churning desire for the 1st of January to arrive, to hit the reset button, to be allowed back into the safety of measurable, accountable, forward, moving time. The Church, in its ancient wisdom, understood the sheer terror of this gap. The move to overlay profound religious meaning onto the traditional midwinter hiatus was a masterful act of cultural stabilization. By making this period holy, the 12 days of Christmas, they gave the dangerous liminal void a purpose, draping the terror in tinsel and piety. They didn't erase the void, they annexed it, transforming the days where the spirits reigned into days where the Savior reigned. But even with the lights and carols, the original energy persists. Look at the specific anxiety that grips retailers and accountants worldwide during this time. The frantic rush of Boxing Day in the UK, the sudden, almost violent need for deep discounts and inventory clearance in the US. It is an economic expression of a spiritual imperative. Purge the old before the new starts. Asterisk if the old remains, it infects the new. The accumulation of physical goods mirrors the accumulation of spiritual debt. We are trying to make ourselves clean before the clock strikes midnight, on the 31st of December, desperately trying to erase the ghost of the calendar that is about to expire. This period also acts as a profound litmus test for the solidity of the modern project. We believe we have conquered time, organizing it into seconds and hours dictated by atomic precision. Yet, the moment we stop working, the fabric loosens, governments slow, courts pause, major news cycles stall. We have designed a society that cannot tolerate pause, yet we enforce one annually. The silence of the city streets between Christmas and New Year. S is not the sound of relaxation. It is the sound of an enormous complex machine sitting idle, its power source momentarily unplugged. And in that silence, we begin to hear the things we usually drown out. I often think about the calendar shifts of the 18th century, particularly when the Gregorian calendar finally took hold across various Protestant lands, including Britain and its colonies. When 11 days were simply removed from September 1752, the resulting chaos was less about timing errors and more about profound existential dread. People genuinely feared that time had been stolen from their lives. That theft, that manipulation of the sacred march of minutes, created a profound distrust of ordered reality. We don't consciously remember the riots of 1752, but the residue of that disruption, the sense that time is not a constant, benign flow but a fragile, edited artifact, lingers in the air during these 7 days. The official narrative tells us this is rest. The hidden truth is that this week doesn't feel real because, historically, it wasn't intended to be. It is the time out, the penalty box, the garbage file of the year. It's the 7 days where the rules governing the structure of our lives cease to apply, and we are left to drift, exposed and waiting for the year's true, hidden origin story to begin anew. If we acknowledge that certain weeks are defined by voids, days swallowed by institutional memory or cultural misdirection, then we must look for moments in history when that void became immediately, physically palpable. Not the gradual decay of centuries, but the sudden, horrifying snap of the present. I am talking about the 9th of November, 1965. This was a Tuesday, late afternoon, just as the workday was ending and the cities of the Northeast were preparing to breathe their evening sigh. For those in the arc stretching from Boston down to New Jersey and reaching far up into parts of Ontario, the atmosphere was defined by the relentless, humming certainty of the modern age. Elevators ran, subways roared, and the arcana of control, the complex matrix of grids and wires, was invisible because it was absolute. Then, around 5:27 p.m., the absolute vanished. It began subtly, perhaps with a slight flicker, the way an old film reel hiccups before shattering. But what followed was not localized, contained, or fixable with a fuse. Over 80,000 square miles plunged into darkness. 30 million people, the working core of American and Canadian civilization, lost the light, lost the power, and most critically, lost the rhythm of the clock. The Great Blackout was not merely an inconvenience. It was a profound, instant shift in reality. Imagine, if you can, the sound of New York City in that instant. It was not the dramatic noise of a collapse. It was the terrifying sound of silence. The deep, pervasive, mechanical drone of the city stopped. The subways froze beneath the streets, trapping hundreds of thousands in the earth. Elevators became steel cages suspended between floors. I've studied the archival reports, and the psychological impact is what always drew me back. It wasn't just the physical darkness. It was the sudden recognition that the delicate, engineered structure we trusted to keep chaos at bay was startlingly fragile. The headlines the next morning capture a specific kind of disorientation. They didn't scream of disaster. They whispered of impossibility. Power failure hits New York, East, cause unknown. Read the New York Times. Notice the emphasis, servant of unknown. In a world committed to rational explanation and constant surveillance, the greatest centers of economic might have been brought to their knees by a phantom. What did that week feel like for those 30 million people? It felt like the week where the script flipped. Without electric light, the gas lights and candles emerged, casting deep, theatrical shadows on faces previously illuminated by harsh fluorescent uniformity. Time stretched. Without the constant input of clocks, news, and screens, the immediate reality became primary. People walked home from Manhattan to Brooklyn across the bridges, guided only by the penumbra of the moon and the vague outline of the city. A silent exodus that stripped away the pretense of speed and efficiency. The human element of that night is often celebrated. The police directing traffic with flashlights, people helping strangers from stalled subways, the unexpected kindness. But beneath that immediate camaraderie was an inchoate dread. What if the lights didn't come back on? What if the cause remained unknown? Which eventually settled on a faulty protective relay at a generating station near Niagara Falls, was almost worse than a conspiracy theory. It meant the entire system was designed with a single point of catastrophic failure. It meant our faith in modernity was built on the mechanical equivalent of a single frayed thread. This is where the forgotten event connects directly to the emotional resonance of the unreal week. The period of the blackout was a compressed moment of cultural disorientation, a time when routine evaporated and the calendar was briefly meaningless. For 14 hours or more, the established dates and schedules simply ceased to matter. You weren't governed by the corporate clock. You were governed by the rising and setting of the sun and the immediate proximity of the person next to you. The media, even days later, struggled to re-establish control over the narrative. They focused heavily on the lack of looting, the good behavior of the populace. But why? Because the greatest fear was not the darkness itself, but the fear of what the darkness might reveal about the underlying instability of society. The fact that chaos didn't erupt was quickly cemented into the official memory, acting as a prophylactic against the truth that control is merely an illusion of constant power supply. The blackout was, in essence, a forced sabbatical from reality, demonstrating how quickly reality can buckle when its foundational infrastructure fails. When the system restarted, when the light came flooding back, those lost hours, that strange, silent, shared night, were immediately archived as an anomaly, a fluke. But the lingering feeling for those who lived it, the subtle realization they carried forward, was that time, like electricity, can be intentionally or accidentally disconnected. The week following the 9th of November felt intensely real, but built on the sudden knowledge that the world they had inhabited the week before was largely fabricated by unseen currents. And that knowledge, that feeling of the ground beneath your feet being thin, is the emotional echo of the forgotten date. It haunts the periphery, a constant dark undercurrent in the flow of our highly regulated lives. What other vital systems are operating right now, powered by a single fragile relay that we have all agreed not to think about? We have explored the shadow texture of this week, the way the world seems to breathe shallowly, suspended between one milestone and the next. We've attributed it to seasonal exhaustion, to the aftermath of consumer ritual, to a kind of cultural jet lag. But all of that is the soft architecture of explanation. The reality, when you trace the timeline backward through the administrative noise, is sharper, colder. The week doesn't align unreal by accident. It is structurally, historically, and intentionally the place where reality is suspended. Look closely at the architecture of the calendar itself. You have the anchor of Christmas Day, the 25th of December, and the definitive boundary of New Year's Day, the 1st of January, and between. You have 8 distinct days, an octave. This is not arbitrary spacing. It is a liturgical framing device designed to contain and sanctify the chaos of the deep winter. But in the systems of power, those concerned with taxes, debts, and the precise moment a contract expires, the octave became something far more volatile. It became the seam. If you study the transition period in Britain and the colonies, the slow, agonizing shift from viewing the 25th of March, Lady Day, or even the 25th of December as the start of the year, to the standardized the 1st of January, you see this week repeatedly being pulled, stretched, and rewritten. It is the place where different versions of time overlapped and fought for dominance. When the calendar shifted, the entire foundation of property, legal age, and financial obligation trembled. It was not merely a date change. It was an act of profound civil surgery, and people felt it. They feared it. The historical record is full of anxiety about those 8 days, not just the solemnity of the religious feast days contained within, but the sheer administrative dread that defining lines were dissolving. This feeling, the subtle hum of disorientation that permeates the modern holiday season, is the residual cultural echo of that temporal violence. We inherited the scar tissue of centuries of calendar reform. We feel adrift because this is the very definition of a floating week, a negotiable zone. we talk about the famous Gregorian calendar shift in 1752, the year Britain and the American colonies adopted the new system, resulting in the excision of 11 days in September. The cries of "Give us back our 11 days" were not just about abstract time. They were about the integrity of their lives, their rents, their harvest dates. While that particular cut happened earlier in the year, the public consciousness was awakened to a terrifying truth. Time could be stolen, manipulated, and politically redefined by those in power. The week between Christmas and New Year is structurally identical to those 11 missing days. It is a period where accountability is intentionally loosened. This is the true, buried detail that reframes everything. The stillness of the dead week is not a societal pause. It is an institutional clearing of the decks. It is the administrative black box. Think about how modern governance and corporate power operate. The massive flow of data, the daily ledger entries, the ceaseless demand for accountability. It all has to stop somewhere. Where do the ghosts of poor quarterly results go to rest? Where are the decisions that were just legally sound but morally bankrupt silently filed away? They are filed in this week. This is the designated time for the systemic erasure of the immediate past. Banks perform massive annual resets. Governmental bodies finalize year-end reports, often using the quiet hours to bury sensitive data or shift the focus onto projected futures rather than audited results. It is the perfect opacity. Everyone is preoccupied with family, tradition, and the self-imposed exhaustion of celebration, providing the ideal cover for institutional housekeeping. The machinery of civilization needs a vacuum to purge itself, and we, through our collective, willing distraction, provide it. I started to see it everywhere, in archived internal memos and long, forgotten legislative schedules. This week is consistently the lowest point of scrutiny for major financial systems. It is the sweet spot where political decisions can be announced with the certainty that immediate attention is fractured and public engagement is minimal. Have you ever noticed how many deep, significant reorganizations or massive data purges are scheduled for the 27th of December or 28th? They aren't just trying to get ahead. They are exploiting the intentional suspension of critical thought. The extended reasoning here is chilling. If we know the system must purge its failures, and we know this week is the optimal time for zero accountability, then the empty feeling isn't about rest. It is about surveillance avoidance. We are meant to feel relaxed because the people pulling the levers need us to look away. It raises the most unsettling question of all. What critical detail? What irreversible action? What administrative crime is committed annually between the 25th of December and the 1st of January that relies entirely on our collective cultural detachment? When time stops being a reliable marker and becomes a negotiable commodity, the people who control the negotiation control reality. We feel the week doesn't count because, structurally, in the deepest sense of administrative control, it is the 1 week designed for no two to count, so that the errors of the previous 51 can be silently corrected. We are living inside the calendar's margin of error, the quiet, the slowness, the lack of structure. This isn't cozy nostalgia. This is the sound of the machine wiping its slate clean. And once you hear that silence for what it is, the sound of history being edited, you cannot unhear it. I've spent too long tracking the margins of history, focusing on the weeks that defy definition, and I've learned one inescapable fact. The gap isn't a mistake. The human need for neat transitions is exploited, creating a calendar where certain days are intentionally muted, flattened, and rendered meaningless. We crave the silence. We lean into the manufactured unreality, because the alternative, the chaotic, desperate truth of what happened when structure broke down, is simply too loud. What does it cost us? This willing blindness. It costs the depth of our understanding, that lingering sense of unease, that feeling that the air itself is thinner during this peculiar span of days. Isn't phantom limb pain. It is the psychic weight of forgotten tradition, the consequence of choosing collective amnesia over uncomfortable remembrance. We were told this week was a rest. We were taught it was a necessary pause. But the archive reveals it was an intentional deletion. I think about the people who fought for those dates to remain sacred, the historians and the families who tried to keep the flame of the forgotten event lit, only to have the light extinguished by the smooth, undeniable convenience of the official schedule. They understood that when you lose the truth of a week, you lose a critical piece of yourself. You become defined not by what you remember, but by what you are engineered to overlook. The file on the Unreal Week is now complete. The context, the buried detail, the cost. It's all there, inked on the official record. I can close the folder, return the documents to the shelf, and step out of this quiet room. But the strange thing about seeing the mechanics of control is that you can never truly unsee them. When that odd, hazy week approaches again, I want to just experience the silence. I'll hear the deliberate sound of the doors closing, protecting us from the noise we were supposed to forget. And I hope, in the quiet, you will hear it too.